This is the theBreaker.news podcast for the week of August 24th, 2025. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the theBreaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 410. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. And on the big deal feature, the bill for BC taxpayers to host FIFA World Cup 26 is more than $600 million. The NDP government is still waiting for federal funding for security. But questions remain about the impacts on British Columbians who are struggling to get by, whether it's seniors, single parents, or the homeless on the downtown east side. My guest this week is Chantelle Spicer, campaign manager with the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition. This is the big deal feature on the theBreaker.news podcast. The FIFA World Cup 26 is coming fast, less than 300 days before it kicks off. Vancouver, Toronto, and Seattle are three of the 16 host cities for the biggest sport event in history, the biggest mega event in British Columbia since the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. Nobody knows how much the whole thing will actually cost taxpayers in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. A case of more questions than answers. How will it impact people who live and work in downtown Vancouver Towers near BC Place Stadium? How will it impact the urban poor, including downtown Vancouver's homeless population? And joining me to talk about that is from the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition, its campaign manager, Chantelle Spicer. Chantelle joins me from East Vancouver. And Chantelle, here we are, less than 300 days until the actual kickoff of the first match at BC Place Stadium. But what I've been finding through Freedom of Information is that this event is actually starting months and months earlier. There is, of course, what we know, the FIFA Congress is coming to the Convention Center at the end of April. But Vancouverites will start to see early in 2026, during the first quarter, changes to downtown. Of course, the decorative signs that go on, and banners and flags will go up, but they'll also start to see barricades. They'll see lots, parking lots, and other facilities that were publicly accessible in 2025 not be publicly accessible for a good portion of 2026. That is going to impact people that your organization represents. And first of all, before we get into the meat and potatoes of FIFA 26, can you tell the audience what the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition is? Who is involved in the coalition?
Great place to start, Bob. Thank you. So the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition is a collective of organizations ranging from the big houses of labor to healthcare workers, to housing advocates, to students, to climate justice organizers who come together to create policy platforms to advocate for a human rights response to poverty, rather than a service provision response to poverty. So we're pretty broad. There's about 80 organizations representing close to 700,000 British Columbians who come together to do that work. Our advocacy ranges along that spectrum of organizations that are members of the coalition. And when we're looking specifically at FIFA, we have kind of like a smaller version of the coalition who are frontline service providers for folks in the downtown east side, as well as neighborhood houses across the city, as well as the Vancouver District Labor Council, who are all kind of coming together to talk about impacts across the spectrum of citizens and residents of Vancouver when it comes to the FIFA games.
What is the communication like with those who, at City of Vancouver, the actual organizing committee office under Jesse Adcock, who is the lead for the Secretariat, as well as the provincial government, because the provincial government is working hand in hand with the city on this project?
So we began coming together to talk about the potential impacts of FIFA last summer. So we've been meeting kind of like informally as just kind of information sharing, information gathering for the past year. And as part of that work, we have reached out to the City of Vancouver, the person who is in charge of creating the human rights framework for the games, as well as Jesse Adcock, as you mentioned, to put forward our concerns, to request meetings, to gather information that we can share with members of our coalition. So we have pretty free-flowing information within our coalition of folks who are doing this, but we're running into quite a few brick walls when it comes to getting information from the city. So about a year ago, initial contact with the city was through the city staff who was put in charge of creating the human rights framework, Andrea Young, who, when we put forward a list of questions, kind of gave us there's nothing to see, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of framework. In responding to that, saying, the human rights framework would be built off of FIFA's human rights framework, as well as federal and provincial legislation. So they did not see the need for engagement with community stakeholders at that time. They were just going to make the human rights framework themselves, which is, of course, deeply concerning. We followed up with a list of specific questions to kind of gauge information about who was the city even considering when it came to creating a human rights framework. Were we going to, should we as community organizers be expecting to see massive street sweeps and displacement of houseless people and people who rely on public spaces for many aspects of their lives, as we saw in the 2010 Olympics? And we were very dissatisfied with the answers that we received, some of them being just one sentence responses or responses that skirted. It's been very frustrating on the city front. We did receive a presentation from the city committee back in June, kind of laying out here's the jurisdiction of what we as the city committee is able to make decisions about when it comes to FIFA. Here's what kind of decisions FIFA is making, laying out what are the dates and times, very public information already, and had said kind of presented a dual message of, we're really happy to receive feedback from the community about concerns when it comes to human rights and displacement and access to services, these kinds of things, while at the same time saying, we're already, we're finalizing a lot of things right now. So you should be expecting to see a release of information from us later this fall. So all around, it's been very frustrating. Provincially, we've had no communication as of yet. We had done an initial reach out to Spencer Chandra Herbert when he was appointed for Minister of Tourism, and never heard anything back. And are now following up with the newly appointed minister, who will be in charge of this file, and have yet to hear anything from there as well. So we definitely continue to have a lot more questions than answers, which gives us not a lot of information in terms of what to plan for, what kind of information we should even be sharing out with community besides the fact that we're concerned about this. So it leaves us not even knowing, being unsure about what to even prepare for.
How does that make you feel, this sense of indifference from Spencer Chandra Herbert when he was the Minister of Tourism, the lead minister in the NDP provincial government on the World Cup file, especially since Spencer Chandra Herbert, who was the minister until the recent cabinet shuffle, and Kang is now the minister. But Spencer Chandra Herbert is an MLA who represents a downtown Vancouver riding in the West End, who has acknowledged previously that there is a lack of affordable housing in the West End. Vulnerable populations, the urban poor, seniors on fixed incomes, yet he becomes the tourism minister in charge of the FIFA file for the province, really does nothing to communicate. And the bigger picture, you've got a premier, Levy, who actually made his name, became famous here in British Columbia and worldwide as one of the key organizers of the movement either against or criticizing the organization of the Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympics, pushing to try to make sure there were civil liberties, pushing to make sure that there were adequate services for the people that need them, the homeless. And here he is, the Premier of British Columbia, and what you're telling me is his cabinet ministers are not communicating with people who are in your position today, which is the position that David Eby was back before 20.
Excellent question and very, very good point, Bob. So I don't know if I would categorize it as indifference per se, but it is part of a wider trend that we as an organization have noticed with this government of having a lot of difficulties in accessing ministers and public officials. We've really struggled with getting meetings or quality feedback from many ministers. This is not just an issue within the Minister of Tourism. That is just generally concerning, is like the lack of opacity that this government has. We are a registered lobby group and are struggling to be able to get meetings, which raises a lot of concerns for us in just citizens being able to access their elected officials and responsible ministers in efficient, transparent ways. Definitely like the whole government response at this time of like critical unaffordability, like in all aspects of life, especially around lack of access to appropriate housing, is very concerning. When we're seeing the government shell out hundreds of millions of dollars so far for this one-time event, while at the same time telling us that they don't have the resources available to, raise the rates of social assistance to at least the poverty line. They're like keeping people in legislated deep poverty while prioritizing events like this. And also, focusing on increasing police budgets, which we know is attached to these games as well, both municipally and provincially. So we're definitely seeing like investments and, positive reinforcement of events like this that are coming, what we see as at the cost of people who are really struggling in this province.
If you were to have that meeting with them now, what three things would you be asking for to be solved urgently now? And what three things would you tell them that need to be in place, ready to go before next June, before all the tens of thousands of tourists come to Vancouver?
And I think that every member of our coalition would probably say something different about this because, many members of our coalition are focusing on different areas of this. Definitely one thing that we would like to see is similar kinds of investments in the things that we and members of the coalition have been calling for a long time, improved access to affordable and dignified transit, definitely improved access to housing, treating housing as part of a human rights framework in this province, increasing stock across the non-market housing spectrum are things that I think we can definitely say that we would like to see, given the fact that people are being displaced and street sweeps are happening literally every day, even without FIFA being here. And I think a third one is having a much clearer understanding around how money was so easily made available for something like this to happen. When we have long-standing calls with significantly smaller budgets that remain unattended to, small reforms to poverty, like deep poverty, social assistance rates are not keeping up with the rates of inflation, the increasing cost of living and unaffordability, especially in Vancouver, but across the province. So yeah, definitely some like rationale on why this has been prioritized over the things that people really need in this province.
You mentioned Ken Sim and his statement at the 1 year countdown back in June when they unveiled the countdown clock at BC Place Stadium. You've talked about efforts to talk with the provincial officials. You've talked about efforts to talk to the 2026 World Cup Secretariat at Vancouver City Hall. But what about elected officials at City of Vancouver? Have you had any luck with them?
We have definitely sent a number of emails sharing our concerns, particularly when there are opportunities where city councilors are already asking for, public, like, what are the public's priorities for the city, like coming into the budget, just in like town halls that are happening across the city that some city councilors have held over the last year, making submissions and raising our voices wherever we can. We've heard from some city councilors that they understand what the concerns are, but we haven't heard a lot of how those concerns are going to be rectified. A lot of what's happening in City Hall, particularly around FIFA, is happening in camera, as you know, in documents that are not being released to the public, even when other cities are doing so. I would say that the same kind of like opaqueness, that kind of like wall exists across all layers of responsibility at this point.
And is the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition also networking with other civil society groups in other host cities around North America, any in Toronto, any in Seattle? Are you sharing notes about the situations there, about the good, the bad, and the ugly? If there's any best practices that you're noticing from elsewhere in North America that should be transplanted into Vancouver?
We are part of a larger network called Dignity 2026, which is actually hosted through a collection of organizations in the States. So there are representatives from all 16 of the host cities who are a part of Dignity 2026. And it's an opportunity to, share these best practices, share concerns, but also share information that's coming out of FIFA with each other as well, so that we're all on the same page about like, what is FIFA saying about this? What are FIFA responsibilities? And that has included, representatives from FIFA attending those Dignity 2026 meetings as well. We're definitely well connected. We have a member from the coalition in Seattle, who's like organizing in Seattle, who has been sharing information about what they've been doing in terms of, letting community members know about FIFA, about potential impacts of FIFA, budgets, city responsibilities, those kinds of things, as well as gathering concerns from residents who are attending those town halls. So we're planning on doing that coming into the new year. Definitely. We've heard from folks in Toronto where the city council is more transparent than the one that we have here in Vancouver, where there are members of, civil society organizations like ours who have been in contact all along with the host city committees, sharing concerns, getting feedback. It's a very reciprocal, communicative relationship from what we've heard from organizers that we're in touch with there. Each city is definitely taking this on in a very different way. So best practices are kind of hard to garner, but there's definitely a lot of conversations happening in all the host cities that are very similar to the concerns that we're sharing here.
Now, Washington, D.C. is not one of the host cities, but it is the seat of government for the United States. It's where the White House is, and Donald Trump has been perhaps one of the biggest cheerleaders for the 2026 World Cup. I don't think there's anyone that approaches him. And does that concern you that the takeover by federal authorities of the Washington, D.C. municipal police could be replicated elsewhere in the United States and affect impoverished populations, and maybe even replicated here in Vancouver? We have not been given any hint at all about security budget. There's no federal multi-party agreement yet with the provinces that are hosting the matches in the host cities. Yet there will have to be a security blanket on each host city, especially Vancouver and Toronto. It's a different different environment than it was in 2010, but even in 2010, we saw a very large security presence in the streets of Vancouver. Are you concerned about that happening, about homeless populations being affected and maybe even criminalized?
I mean, that is already happening to some extent. You know, people who are unhoused and rely on public spaces are criminalized right now, literally right this moment, every day. You know, our NDP government in the election last year, like, ran a whole campaign focused on criminalizing people who experience poverty and homelessness in this province. So we're definitely very concerned about that, especially, you know, when we have the 2010 Olympics to look back on, which was one of the largest police budgets for an event in Canadian history. And we expect to see that replicated for this event. We've heard from the city that police from Alberta and Saskatchewan are already being contracted to come to support security initiatives around FIFA. We have no idea what their responsibilities are going to be here. We know that the city is installing a number of surveillance cameras throughout the city. The location of those, we don't know, or whether they're temporary or permanent, or when and how they're going to be used. You know, we've already seen local police, the Vancouver Police Department, increase use of like drones throughout the last couple of years. So we're definitely seeing, through, you know, investments in police at both the provincial and municipal level, supporting increased police presence in all aspects. So yeah, we're definitely very concerned about that.
Well, thanks again for joining us on the podcast, Chantelle Spicer from the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition, campaign manager of the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition, looking ahead at FIFA World Cup 26. Chantelle, where can people find out more information about the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition?
The website is the best place to direct people to. It's bcpovertyreduction.ca, where folks can find all of our ongoing campaigns that we have, more information about the coalition, as well as our policy platforms.
What's on the menu at the 2025 PNE Fair? Pizza, corn dogs, funnel cakes, and mini donuts with a twist. PNE Executive Chef Andy Chong and Miss Vino Carissa Rose launched the Guilty Pleasures wine pairing experience. Another first, during the Tattoos Festival on August 29th and 30th, Indigenous chefs will take the Safeway cooking stage, showcasing creations like lemonade infused with sweetgrass and strawberry with soapberry foam.
I've grown up, born and bred in BC, and the PNE has been a staple of my life for as long as I can remember as a little kid. Coming through those gates and smelling the popcorn and the cinnamon donuts, walking down the main street as I got older and was able to enjoy the dueling pianos and the beer garden over there, and then as you see on our menu, if you can remember walking up the main street and that smell of the onions as we move on with the Jimmy's Burgers. So you're going to get to see some of our dishes that were coming and being prepared. There's lots more that are going to come along with these as well. We've got
food and wine pairing does not need to be fancy. We do not need to have caviar and champagne. We can pair chips and find an amazing wine to go with it. Same idea with all this fair food. Every single item, we can find a couple pairings that'll be paired beautifully with it. So we've picked out some BC wines today that we think will complement and contrast some of the items, because that's two of the main elements that we always look for when we're pairing.
My name is Chef Sarah McConsmiro. I am the owner of the Tradish Food Truck and the Ancestor Cafe in Fort Langley, as well as the Tradish Plant Medicine Jams. I am from the Saisi Dene First Nation in northern Manitoba, but I grew up out here in BC.
Morning everyone, my name is Inez Cook. I am from the Newhalk Nation in Bella Coola. My traditional name is Sneetsmana. I'm the owner of Salmon and Bannock Bistro, Salmon and Bannock on the Fly.
What we're doing is a strawberry sweetgrass lemonade with a whipped.
It's a sopalali foam, so we've made it with soap berries, which is traditional to my region. They're tiny little berries. I did have some to show you, and we had a little accident, so I had to use them all. So that's a later thing. You have to come to the restaurant to see them. I'm hoarding them. They look like capers in the jar. They're tiny little red or green berries, and you whip it up normally with berries, sugar, something like that. Today we use Sarah's sweetgrass strawberry syrup, and it kind of has an Aperol taste, if you're familiar with that. A little bit bitter. Short term is soapberry, like soap. We call it sopalali foam, and that's what we're topping it up with. Excited for you to try it.
Is there anything special about the ingredients in this?
Yes.
Antioxidants.
So our lemonades, we serve these in our cafe. We have 8 different flavors. This is one of our flavors. It's strawberries and sweetgrass. It's something that is a back east flavor. Back east, it's something sweetgrass grows everywhere, and strawberries as well. So it's a nice way for us to like combine our cultures from West Coast to East Coast.
And at the restaurant, we make it with sweetgrass infused cherries, and we do cocktails and mocktails with it.
The PNE runs through Labor Day at Hastings Park in Vancouver. On the Breaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. In Focus Taiwan.tw, AI system predicting rogue waves to be deployed in 16 coastal regions. The Central Weather Administration said it developed an artificial intelligence system that predicts rogue waves over the next 24 hours. A total of 430 rogue wave incidents have been recorded over the past 25 years, causing 750 casualties, 1/3 of which were fatalities. In ABC News Australia, preacher Wissam Haddad and an Islamic State terrorist are targeting the pro-Palestinian movement for recruits. A man caught on camera flying a black flag and ambushing an anti-war protester on the Sydney Harbour Bridge this month was a convicted terrorist and youth recruiter for notorious jihadist spiritual leader Wissam Haddad. Haddad has been monitored by Australian authorities for more than 20 years, building a violent network that is exploiting the pro-Palestinian movement and supporting the global resurgence of the Islamic State terrorist group. New South Wales police are considering using new hate symbols legislation to charge protesters who flew the Shahada flags, common Islamic symbols that have been appropriated by terrorist groups. In Anchorage Daily News, jailed Anchorage protester accused of defacing military base sign during Trump-Putin summit. James Garrett Hermanson, 31, was one of hundreds who took part in peaceful protests and demonstrations during the August 15th meeting between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Anchorage. The summit concluded with no comprehensive deal to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Anchorage police officers working POTUS detail at the base's Government Hill Gate during the event said they saw Hermanson walk up to the gate and paint FUCK Trump on it. Hermanson has entered a not guilty plea. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In the Oregonian, Ethics Commission will ask panel to review public meetings law. Problems with the serial communications part of the law are front and center in City Council text chains. A new state law in Oregon that took effect this year tightened the rules around serial communications, or sequential communications between elected officials and their intermediaries that could constitute a quorum. One of the fundamental tenets of Oregon's public meetings law is that decision-making bodies, such as the Portland City Council, should conduct business in public. The law prohibits a quorum of a decision-making body from meeting or making decisions in private. In Crosscut, Ferguson, Washington will not be bullied by federal threats on immigration. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi sent a letter to the governor last week demanding that the state change its sanctuary policies. Ferguson wrote that Bondi's letter lacked any legal explanation and was filled with threats that embarrassed and disgraced the office of the U.S. Attorney General. About 28% of Washington's state budget is federal funding, according to Governor Bob Ferguson's office. He said Tuesday that losing that money would be a blow to the state's already stretched budget, but that the state must continue to uphold its values. And check out theBreaker.news and bobmackin.substack.com for the stories behind these headlines. Inside the World Cup deal for Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh leaders, and watch Stanley Cup comes to West Vancouver. Read the stories behind the headlines. Go to theBreaker.news and bobmackin.substack.com. That's Cascadia calling on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast.
Don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate, so you won't stand alone, you won't stand alone.
The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to the heroes of summertime heat waves, the people who help keep us cool and keep us hydrated, the lifeguards at beaches and pools, the air conditioning technicians, the staff at cooling shelters for seniors and the poor. The people in the heat of it all, too, the cooks and the highway construction workers. Stay cool and stay hydrated. And you can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.news. That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of August 24th, 2025. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on the 24th of August in 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as head of the Soviet Communist Party and Ukraine declared independence from the Soviet Union? Also, on the 24th of August in 1995, Microsoft released Windows 95 in North America. Now you know. Send me your feedback. Send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca and bobmackin.substack.com. Sign up for the free email newsletter and get updates to your inbox, or follow The Breaker News for news as it happens on X, formerly Twitter. And you can support The Breaker for as little as $7 a month. For more information, go to bobmackin.substack.com. Until next week.